The Atlantic decided, hey, that information that we had that we said we weren't going to share, the war plans, quote unquote war plans, well, here they are. And they put out all the text thread, I believe, most of the text thread that they had
the whole
from
thing, all
the Signal chat, which goes into detail of what was put in this. Now, again, you may have an issue with the fact that it happened, and I think you should have an issue with the fact that it happened, the fact that this Signal chat was able to then reach the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic. That is a blunder. That's an issue. Now, you have people like Waltz saying, we're not sure. We're looking into it. We're not a conspiracy theorist, but who knows what happened here.
This, I think, was the best answer I've heard so far, other than from the president, who was saying, he's learned his lesson. We're moving on. But I think she addresses it appropriately at the start to get ahead of it, knowing that it's coming in this hearing. But let's play bite one from Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence.
The President and National Security Advisor Waltz held a press conference yesterday with a clear message. It was a mistake that a reporter was inadvertently added to a Signal chat with high-level national security principals having a policy discussion about imminent strikes against the Houthis and the effects of the strike. The National Security Advisor has taken full responsibility for this, and the National Security Council is conducting an in-depth review along with technical experts working to determine how this reporter was inadvertently added to this chat. The conversation was candid and sensitive, but as the President and National Security Advisor stated, no classified information was shared. There were no sources, methods, locations, or war plans that were shared. This was a standard update to the National Security Cabinet that was provided alongside updates that were given to foreign partners in the region.
Like Tulsi said, do an investigation of how this could possibly happen. How, of all the random people that this happened. I am going to read to you a bit of what it said so you can have an update on what these war plans were, and I want you to tell me what you think. At 11:44 a.m. Eastern Time, Pete Hegseth posted in the chat in all caps, team update. The text began, time now, 11:44 Eastern. Weather is favorable. Just confirmed with CENTCOM. We are go for mission launch. CENTCOM or Central Command. And then 12:15 Eastern Time, F-18's launch. First strike package. Then he said, then 13:45 trigger-based F-18 first strike window starts. Target terrorist is at his known location, so should be on time. Also, strike drone launch. And then the final one saying F-18 second strike starts. Also, first sea-based Tomahawks launched. Now, again, as they said, no locations were shared. The target's name wasn't shared. All of that was kept classified. And as Tulsi said, this is a standard update when these kind of events are happening. I think it depends on how you read it. I think Will read it as like, okay, this was way overblown. And I read it, whenever I see all caps, maybe I start reading and yelling. And I go, well, this feels pretty intense to me.
Here's why I think it was less shocking to me. Because the way that it was reported was that it was so classified and so detailed of war plans, which the Atlantic is now calling attack plans. They've even backed off of using war plans.
Yeah, I think that's more accurate.
Is that the very existence of it on Signal was the violation, was the problem. And so that's why when I read that, in the fact that these principals were communicating through something that the Biden administration has used, they referenced there's more information and details in your high side inbox, which is the classified system. The fact that these plans, as Tulsi Gabbard said, had already been laid to foreign partners. None of that, what I read from Pete Hegseth, seemed like it was inappropriately placed within a Signal conversation without a journalist. The problem and what remains and what the Trump administration has owned, and I think should continue to draw the force and attention back to that error, which is clearly very embarrassing, clearly a big mess up that should have never happened, and that should be the focus. The messaging needs to be that they continue to look at that and say, listen, we are investigating. This is the problem, though. The problem was the journalist being included, not that they were discussing this on Signal.
No,
and I think that's the difference that we need to point out here.
I don't understand what they want. They want them to never text or use any kind of messaging system. That's just not how it works. Okay, we're living in 2025. The reality is you're dealing with a bunch of people who have a bunch of jobs going on right now. They need to keep updated. You don't have time to sit there and call everyone and spend that time. Unfortunately, that's not the time we live in right now. Maybe fortunately. You're able to get these messages across quickly, efficiently, and go. Yes, the big blunder, the big mistake was that this was included. I have no problem with Signal. I have no problem with you using some sort of service like this that is protected for texting and for messaging. I think that's important. It's not like they don't have phones. It's not like you can't text them or reach out to any of these people. Again, they don't live in a vacuum. However, let's not also forget that this is very sensitive information. I think that's a good way that Tulsi said. Sensitive information, not necessarily classified information, but information you don't necessarily want to go to the press, information you don't necessarily want to be posted publicly. But I will tell you how the others respond. JD Vance put out, it's very clear, Goldberg oversold what he had. But one thing in particular really stands out. Remember when he was attacking Ratcliffe for blowing the cover for a CIA agent? Turns out Ratcliffe was simply naming his chief of staff. That was part of it as well. When in the original article, it said that he was protecting the names of CIA operatives, and we found out that it's partially true.
And once again, that's why this original report was laced with so much innuendo that it made you think that they were so reckless that there was deep cover agents within Yemen whose names were being thrown around on a third-party app. When in reality, the chief of staff for John Ratcliffe, which is not typically, you know Susie Wiles, the chief of staff for the White House. You typically don't know the CIA chief of staff, but that isn't because they are operationally undercover. It's because they're the chief of staff for the CIA. They want to keep a lower profile on that. And there are more sensitive things going on to not make them a target. However, that wasn't someone that wouldn't have been familiar to the group. Most of those individuals, if he had mentioned a CIA operative, they would be like, who? But the fact that they were all designating who their point of contact was,
they knew what we're talking about.
Those people knew who he was talking about and that they could contact that person. So even that in and of itself goes more to the fact that Jeffrey Goldberg saw this and held it until the day before the yearly global terror threat assessment hearing before the Senate and dropped it there. And then today dropped the second batch with all of the stuff in it before the House version of that. And here's what also concerns me as we're looking at all this. Almost every congressman in the hearing today, which they had very targeted lines of questioning about what was released from the Atlantic this morning. So much so that most of them had that kind of TikTok of what was happening that is kind of the crux of this entire conversation that is causing so much concern, printed out on giant posters. Yes, they do that in-house, but when every single one of the Democrats on the committee had that poster printed, and they weren't all identical, they didn't click print 30 times, some had other embellishments and things like that on it. I don't know that printer is fast enough to get all of those members of Congress that poster based off the timeline of when it was released. So I'm pretty sure, don't know for a fact, but it seems like the Democrats had that prior to the hearing already.